Hello everyone, how are you? It has been a little bit over 2 years since I started this YouTube channel for the sole purpose of reviewing films when I was a little bit of a younger person, more of an optimistic person, and one of the very first films I actually reviewed was the last chapter in the Hobbit trilogy, The Battle of the Five Armies. In that review I said that since all 3 of the films have been released, I could finally look forward to someone taking the whole trilogy and editing it down into one cohesive film, throwing out all the unnecessary stuff that plagued so much of the trilogy's running time, an obvious attempt at bloating the films as much as possible with unnecessary fan service and action scenes, and an attempt to stretch the films out to similar lengths as their far superior predecessors in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Fast forward to 2017, I discovered that such an edit actually exists, and it's only appropriate for me to review it as my 100th review. That's right, folks. Now, this video is more for those of you who are incredibly familiar with the Hobbit story. For those of you who are not, this video is probably going to be incredibly confusing, and it's basically very spoiler heavy, so consider that a warning in case you haven't seen the films. This version is a little over 4 hours long, and to be honest with you, it's basically almost exactly what I was hoping it was going to be. Now let's start with the obvious: characters. Unnecessary characters that have been removed, because basically most of them were nothing else but fan service in the original theatrical cuts. First of all, in this version, there is no Radagast, there is no Saruman, and there is no Galadriel. The investigation that Gandalf conducts at Dol Guldur is almost completely missing. I think it was mostly during the second film and the beginning of the third. And also the love triangle between Tauriel, Kili, and Legolas has also been deleted. The 2 elves in this version only show up during the Mirkwood arrest scene, and this is a scene I also felt was kind of filler and could have been taken out, but it really can't because it's so very connected to 2 other scenes in the film, one of them exactly preceding it, when they are fighting the spiders in the Mirkwood forest. The transition between these 2 scenes is just so, you can't separate one from the other through editing. It just doesn't work. And it's also referenced later on in the Battle of the Five Armies when Bilbo is giving the Arkenstone to Thranduil. And this is a scene I'm not really a big fan of, but it really can't be removed because the film really doesn't function without it. So there you go. Legolas basically only shows up here as a mere cameo, and Tauriel is not even a character. She shows up once, she's in the background, and has 1 line. And it's really interesting how her being removed from the film influences Kili's story, because Kili doesn't die at the end of this film. I mean, we don't see him die on screen, so he doesn't die. And this is something I actually liked, because it was a testament to how irrelevant and unimportant Kili's death is to the overarching plot. Unfortunately, the Jar Jar Binks of Middle-earth, known as Alfred, couldn't be removed because he's really involved in some very key scenes, but fortunately his antics are significantly reduced. Now that's mostly the characters. Among many other things that were cut, obviously some very ridiulous action scenes, the barrel ride scene for one, of course, and others. And apparently these were the most difficult parts to recut because of Legolas and Tauriel constantly showing up in them. There is one action scene I kind of regret was omitted. It's the very first fight they have with Azog, which is initially in the end of the very first movie, and it's a fun scene, it's a good climax for that movie, but it really doesn't have its place here, in which we have all 3 of the films in one story, because there was that sense of safety after that scene that they were rescued by the eagles. But since the second movie immediately starts with a chase sequence, having both of those scenes here, basically seeming to play out in real time, just doesn't work. You can't just get out of an action scene and immediately end up in another one. Tonally, it's very, very jarring. Now, what all of these edits and cuts do is give this one film, huddled back together out of 3 films, a perfect 3-act structure. Because you see, if we take a basic 3-act structure model, we can pretty much pinpoint the exact scenes when an act ends and another one begins. Because you see, at the end of an act, something very irreversible has to happen in a story. The inciting incident is Gandalf gathering the dwarves at Bilbo and asking him, or better yet, bullying him into helping them. And this also seems a lot shorter in this version. I think it's 20 minutes max, while in the theatrical version it seemed to go on for fucking ever. Plot point 1 and the end of Act 1 is them getting trapped in the Goblin Tunnel and Bilbo meeting and stealing the ring from Gollum. Now, the Gollum scene is left intact in this one. It's one of the best scenes of any of these films. For that reason alone, it was worth it to make this trilogy. But the Pale Orc subplot has been significantly trimmed down and edited in such a way as to suggest that not only does the Great Goblin notify Azog of the dwarves' whereabouts, it is actually them killing the Great Goblin that triggers the orcs wanting revenge and wanting to hunt our group down. 2 things that are irreversible. Bilbo steals the ring from Gollum, and Gandalf and the dwarves killed the Great Goblin. The midpoint is the Mirkwood incidents, them fighting the spiders and getting arrested by the elves but ultimately escaping. Nothing necessarily irreversible happens, therefore this isn't a plot point. Next. Plot point number 2 and the end of Act 2 is of course the showdown with Smaug, which really feels like in this version is given its own little contained sequence. Like instead of having that fucking cock tease at the end of the Desolation of Smaug and having him make a cameo in the beginning of the Battle of the Five Armies, no, here it's this very streamlined little sequence with all the cheese cut out that really works. And irreversible, well yeah, Bard kills Smaug, that's fucking irreversible. The climax is the Battle of the Five Armies, the battle itself, and man, I actually cared about this battle for once. It felt like it had stakes and some weight to it, and that's because it's basically the only like real big fight we get in this version of the film, because like I said, most of the other action scenes have been either trimmed down or cut out completely, and man, in this version actually it does feel like everything has been building up to this. It's when the main tensions of the film are truly brought to their most intense point. Wow man, it really works. Irreversible? Well yeah, some characters die, conflicts are resolved, and the ones who survive, mainly the protagonist, is left with a new sense of who he really is. The end. Now that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Now a lot of other things that seem to bother people about these films, including myself, like how artificial it looks sometimes, how the lighting is so unnatural, how most of the dwarves are basically nothing more than just sidekicks instead of being well fleshed out characters. Well, that stuff, all of that stuff still persists, it's still here, that just can't be fixed with editing. But mostly the story and the structure has been really cleaned up, and it just goes to show you that the Hobbit films are really not bad films per se. They're just very unremarkable films. They pale in comparison to The Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings, which were really like very dark and brutal films, which really had a depth to them. Like in comparison to those, The Hobbit really does seem like a cartoon. But I don't think necessarily that's a bad thing. The really bad thing is that they tried to take this cartoon and to turn it into something incredibly epic, which it really is not. But this edited version of The Hobbit I think really works. I can watch this now. It's a very simple adventure. It's a pretty good prequel to The Lord of the Rings. Thanks for watching my review, folks, as always. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I will see you later with other reviews. Until then, folks, stay cool, stay awesome, take care, and goodbye.